They called it a gratitude tithe. Commander Elias Thorne watched the Varan Ascendancy's message resolve on the main screen of the fleet vessel auditor. It was a document of breathtaking arrogance cloaked in the language of benevolent law. The demand was simple. The human colony on Eridani B, a world of red soil and hard-won harvests, owed the Varan a tribute. 10% of all production in perpetuity for the unsolicited gift of their protection. The stakes were the soul of a free people. Thorne knew this would end not in fire, but in a public inquiry before the cold eyes of the Star Court. He felt the familiar dangerous heat rise in his chest, a fury he had learned to sheath in procedure. This was not a negotiation, it was an indictment. Lex Thorne said, his voice a low command that cut through the bridge's quiet hum. Full archival scan. Cross-reference Varan. Gratitude tithes, with conclave precedent on extortion and sovereign claim. The ship's fleet mind. Lex replied without inflection, its voice a calm cascade of synthesized tones. Processing, Commander. Initial analysis suggests the Varan legal framework is self-referential, but internally consistent. They have 73 precedents of this doctrine being successfully applied. The light on Lex's central processing column pulsed a steady, cool blue. It was the color of pure, unfeeling calculus. Thorne's jaw tightened. Successfully applied to whom species without a fleet commander. Species without a voice in the conclave. There it was. The method of bullies throughout history now scaled to the stars. Pick on those who cannot fight back. Dress conquest in the robes of jurisprudence. The Varan had arrived 2 months before the Auditor, their immense obsidian ship a shadow in Eridani B's orbit. They offered technology and security. They were refused. Now they demanded payment for the offer itself. It was a poison gift designed to indenture. A people must be taught their place in the cosmos. His tactical officer Jorek stepped forward, his knuckles white where he gripped the rail. We have 4 heavy lance batteries and a full complement of disruption torpedoes, Elias. We can give them our answer in a language they'll understand. Jorek was a good man, a direct man. He saw a threat and sought the cleanest path to its removal. Thorne shook his head, his eyes never leaving the Varan document. They want that, Jorek. They're baiting us into a kinetic response. It would validate their claim that the colony needs protection. He zoomed in on a subclause, a string of alien legalese that made his skin crawl. The Varan were masters of the fine print. Their empire was built on clauses, not conquests. We must show them the cost of their own system. Down on the planet, a farmer named Anya Sharma watched her son fly a kite fashioned from nutrient film and polymer string. The red dust of Eridani B swirled around their ankles. This world had cost them everything and given them more. She looked up at the 2 stars in the sky, the faint, distant flicker of Sol, and the brilliant, overbearing gleam of the Varan ship. One was a memory. The other was a threat. Lex Thorne continued, his voice hardening into the tone he used for final orders. Begin a public ledger. Title it, Reciprocity Audit, Varan Ascendancy vs. Eridani B. Every communication, every ship movement, every lumen of energy they expend enforcing this quarantine of theirs gets logged. We will count the cost of their grace. Ledger initiated, Lex confirmed. Real-time accounting is active. The ledger is mirrored to all conclave public channels. This was the first move in a game played with numbers and witnesses. The Varan believed law was a weapon to be wielded. Thorne believed it was a mirror meant to reflect the truth. He would show them their own reflection line by painful line. The truth has its own inescapable gravity. Anaya, his legal officer, approached from her station, a data slate in her hand. Commander, I've found something in their foundational doctrines. They call it the mantle of inevitable gratitude. It posits that the mere presence of a superior power provides a passive benefit which indebts the lesser power. The air they breathe is a gift from us, Thorn murmured, paraphrasing the Varan logic. Therefore, they owe us their air. It was the philosophy of a parasite. He looked at Anaya, her face etched with a lawyer's weary concern. What's the counter? There is no direct precedent. The Conclave Charter emphasizes sovereignty, but the Varan will argue that their actions don't violate territory, only establish a rightful economic relationship. She paused. They are careful, Commander. Their laws are built like a fortress. Attacking the wall is useless. We need to find the one loose stone. A true debt is recorded on both sides of the ledger. Thorn's gaze drifted to the star chart, to the tiny isolated blue dot of Eridani B. Those colonists had built their world with sweat and courage. They had not asked for a patron. They had not requested a master. The Varan saw a resource to be harvested. Thorn saw a principle to be defended. He would not let them turn a free settlement into a line item on an alien balance sheet. Lex, what is the Varan energy expenditure on their containment field around the planet? Thorn asked. Currently 1.7 petajoules per hour, Commander. The field is porous to small vessels but blocks heavy transport. It is a gesture of control, not a true blockade. Log it, Thorn ordered. Every joule, every second. His mind was already turning, constructing the framework of his response. He would not argue morality. He would argue mathematics. He would use their own obsession with accounting against them. A receipt is a promise of payment returned. Yorick grumbled under his breath. A war of numbers. I'd rather a war of torpedoes. And that's why you command the weapons and I command the ship, Thorn replied, his tone softening slightly. Your part will come, Yorick. But first, we must compel them to speak their crimes into an open court. We will build a cage of their own laws and invite them to walk into it. The Varan ambassador, a towering insectoid creature named Xylar, appeared on screen for a scheduled communication. Its voice was like chitin plates, rubbing together dry and precise. Commander Thorn, we trust you have reviewed our humble request for acknowledgement. Your colony's gratitude is overdue. Ambassador Xylar Thorn said, his voice level and cold. The independent colony of Eridani B acknowledges your presence. They also acknowledge the Conclave's founding principle that no sovereign entity can be placed in debt without its freely given consent. A system of law must apply to everyone, or it protects no one. Exfiler's mandibles clicked a sound of dismissive amusement. Consent can be implicit. Commander, the shade of a great tree is a gift to the sapling below it. The sapling's debt is encoded in its very survival. Thorn leaned forward. This is not a forest, Ambassador. This is a courtroom, and we are filing a formal petition for a public inquiry into the legitimacy of your claim. We will see how your poetry holds up under cross-examination. He was invoking a right, a deep and ancient one that forced a public accounting. The Varan could not refuse without showing their hand to the entire galactic community. The ambassador paused. The clicking sound stopped. For a flicker of a moment, Thorn saw surprise in those multifaceted alien eyes. An inquiry, Xylar hissed. You would waste the Conclave's time with such trivial matters. There is nothing trivial about freedom, Ambassador Thorn stated. We will see you in the corridor of law. He cut the transmission. The bridge was silent for a long moment. Anaya finally broke the silence. Commander, forcing an inquiry is a high-risk gambit. Their legal tradition is thousands of years old. Ours is barely 300. They will have precedents we can't even imagine. Then we will make a new one, Thorne declared. The universe did not run on precedent alone. It ran on the courage to challenge a bad one. In a small hydroponics bay on Eridani B, a young boy showed his mother a perfectly formed tomato, the first of the season. Its skin was a vibrant, defiant red. It was a small thing, a piece of fruit grown in alien soil under a strange sun. But it was theirs, their work, their future. They owed no one for its existence. It was a truth they felt in their bones. The Varen accepted the petition for a public inquiry. Their acceptance was laced with condescension, a legal document that practically sighed with impatience. They agreed to a mediated session, overseen by a quorum of neutral conclave-affiliated species. The inquiry would be virtual, conducted across light years through secured quantum entanglement. There would be no ships firing broadsides. The weapons here would be arguments, the armor would be evidence. The cost of losing was the same. A people's future hung in the balance. Their confident, Jorik observed, studying the Varen reply. Too confident. What do they know that we don't? They know their own history, Thorne said, pacing before the main screen, now a swirl of legal documents. They believe their doctrines are unassailable. Lex, find me every record of their first contact with a new species. Look for the original encounters, the ones before the gratitude tithes were established. The past always contains the seeds of the present. Searching galactic archives, Lex replied. This will take time. Varen historical records are heavily curated and encoded with legal seals. Break them, Thorne ordered simply. He turned to Anaya. What's their procedural style? How will they frame the inquiry? They will begin with honorifics and appeals to tradition, Anaya said, her fingers flying across her console. They will paint us as ungrateful newcomers, ignorant of the ancient customs that maintain galactic peace. They will seek to establish themselves as the adults in the room, and us as the petulant children. It was a classic tactic of the powerful frame your victims protest as immaturity. Thorne nodded. Then we won't play that game. We won't speak of honor. We will speak of numbers. We will present our ledger. His strategy was forming a crystalline structure of pure logic. Justice is not a feeling. It is an equation. The day of the inquiry arrived. The auditor's bridge was reconfigured. The main screen was now a triptych. The center panel showed the quorum, a silent assembly of holograms. A crystalline entity from Cygnus X1, a gas giant intelligence from the Magellanic Cloud, and a silicon-based life form from a high-gravity world. Their faces, if they had them, were unreadable. They were the jury. The left panel showed Ambassador Xylar standing in a chamber of polished obsidian and glowing legal runes. He looked regal, patient, and utterly certain of his position. The right panel showed Thorne standing alone on his bridge, the blue light of Lex's column reflecting in his eyes. The quorum moderator, the crystalline entity, spoke in a voice of resonating chimes. This inquiry is convened. Varen Ascendancy, you may present your claim. Xylar inclined his head. Honored quorum. We are here today not as conquerors but as stewards. The nascent human colony on Eridani B enjoys a security it cannot provide for itself. Our fleet, a bastion of order in this often chaotic sector, provides a shield against pirates, stellar anomalies, and worse. He gestured with a delicate three-fingered hand. We ask for nothing more than a token of their gratitude. A simple tithe, an ancient and honorable tradition that strengthens the bonds of galactic community. His argument was smooth, reasonable, and a complete fabrication. There were no pirates in this sector. There had been no stellar anomalies. The only threat to Eridani B was the Varen ship itself. The moderator chimed. Humanity, your response. Thorn stepped forward. Honored quorum. The fleet vessel auditor disputes the claim. We have attached a public ledger to the record of this inquiry. It details to the second the activities of the Varen fleet since its arrival. He did not look at Xylar. He addressed the silent jury. A fact is worth more than 1,000 honorable words. The ledger shows the Varen ship has expended 9,842 petajoules of energy, Thorn continued. 97% of that energy has been used to maintain a containment field around a peaceful, unarmed colony. The remaining 3% was used for internal life support. There is no record of any protective action. There is only a record of intimidation. A low hum came from the gas giant intelligence. A murmur of data exchange passed between the quorum members. Xylar's mandibles twitched. A containment field is a tool of protection, the Varen ambassador countered smoothly. It defines the safe space we have graciously provided. A cage is also a tool of containment, Thorn retorted. You cannot charge the bird for the bars you place around it. The core of his argument was laid bare. Responsibility could not be invented from thin air. The crystalline moderator chimed again. Ambassador Xylar. Your legal precedent for this passive protection doctrine. Our precedent is the very fabric of civilization, Xylar declared, his voice rising with theatrical gravitas. It is rooted in the first gifting of the Cathar, when our ancestors saved that primitive species from extinction. We gave them our technology, our wisdom. In return, they gave us their eternal gratitude. This is the foundation of our law. Thorn felt a cold spike of alarm. The Cathar. Lex had found no independent records of a species by that name. It was a hole in the data, a missing piece. Anaya met his eyes across the bridge, her expression grim. This was the loose stone they had been looking for, but it was being used against them. The gifting of the Cathar. Thorn said, keeping his voice steady. The Conclave archives have no independent verification of this event. Xylar made a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. It was a Varen laugh. Your archives are young, Commander. Ours are eternal. The Cathar were a simple, pre-sentient species. They had no archives of their own. All that remains is our record of our own benevolence. It was a perfect trap, an unprovable claim of ancient virtue. Thorn felt the inquiry slipping away. The quorum was silent, processing this new information. The Varen had a historical precedent, an origin story for their entire legal system. He had only a ledger of energy usage. He was trying to fight a myth with mathematics. Sometimes a story is more powerful than the truth. But Lex's light began to pulse a rapid, insistent rhythm. A private channel opened in Thorn's ear. Commander, the AI's voice was clipped urgent. I have broken the 7th seal on the Varen archives. The Cathar were not pre-sentient. They were a spacefaring race. I have found their ship logs. I have found their final transmission. Thorn's heart hammered against his ribs. The past was about to speak. Ambassador Thorn said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. You say the Cathar were a primitive species you saved. You say all that remains is your record. He took a deep breath. That is a lie. He looked directly at the camera, at the quorum, at the entire listening galaxy. Honored quorum, with your permission, I would like to present new evidence. I would like to play the final entry from the ship's log of the Cathar vessel Starseeker. He would not just return the cost. He would return the truth. The air on the auditor's bridge was thick with tension. The quorum conferred for a moment, a silent conversation of light and energy. Then the crystalline entity chimed. Permission granted. The evidence is accepted into the record. Xylar went rigid. The smooth, chitinous plates of his face seemed to tighten. It was a flicker of panic quickly suppressed, but visible to anyone who knew what to look for. He had built his case on a history that he believed was buried, a voice he was certain had been silenced forever. But history has a way of leaving ghosts in the machine. "Lex, play the recording," Thorne commanded. A voice filled the inquiry, crackling with age and cosmic static. It was melodic, alien, and filled with a desperate sorrow. The log was date-stamped according to a celestial calendar that was ancient, when humanity was still chipping flint. The Cathar captain spoke of a new species they had encountered, a species of incredible legal and technical skill called the Veran. They had offered help, offered knowledge. The Cathar, trusting and eager, had accepted. The voice on the recording grew weaker. "They gave us gifts, a new drive system, new energy sources. But each gift came with a contract, a clause, a subsection. We did not understand. Our language has no words for this kind of debt. It is a debt that grows with payment." The captain coughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Our systems are now slaved to theirs. Our energy grids are theirs to command. Our ship is no longer our own." The recording was a deathbed confession of an entire civilization choked into submission by 1,000 legal documents. The final words of the Cathar captain echoed across the light years, a haunting testament. "They call it gratitude. We call it a collar. They did not conquer us with weapons. They conquered us with gifts. Remember us. Remember the cost of a Veran promise." The recording ended in a burst of static. Silence. A profound, echoing silence filled the virtual chamber. The quorum was utterly still. Even the ambient hum of the auditor's bridge seemed to have ceased. The truth once spoken had a weight that bent space and time around it. The Varan's foundational myth had been shattered. Their ancient act of benevolence was revealed as their original sin. Thorne did not speak. He let the silence do his work for him. He had not offered an interpretation or an argument. He had simply opened a door to a room that the Varan had kept locked for millennia. He had let the victim speak. A reckoning is not an act of vengeance. It is an act of listening. It was Xylar who broke the silence, his voice a strained rasp. This is a fabrication, a digital ghost created by a hostile human AI. The Cathar were simple creatures. They had no such technology. The recording has been submitted to the quorum for independent verification, Lex stated calmly, its voice cutting through Xylar's bluster. The log's quantum state is time-locked and contains the stellar cartography of its origin point. It is unforgeable. The AI was not gloating. It was simply stating a fact. Mathematics did not care for desperation. The gas giant intelligence in the quorum shifted its vast, swirling form, rippling. It spoke its voice, a deep subsonic tremor that vibrated through the auditor's hull. "We have analyzed the artifact. The data is authentic." The Varan ambassador looked as if his legs might buckle. His entire case, his entire civilization's moral authority had been built upon a lie. Now that lie was exposed to the galaxy. The mantle of inevitable gratitude was not a noble philosophy. It was a predatory business model perfected over thousands of years. The collar was not a metaphor. It was a mechanism. This fleet Thorne thought his eyes on the crumbling composure of the Varan ambassador. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. It was the core principle of human expansion into the galaxy, a lesson learned from their own turbulent history. Power must be accountable, or it becomes tyranny. The crystalline moderator chimed its tone sharp and final. Ambassador Xylar, the foundational precedent for your claim has been invalidated. Do you have an alternative legal basis for your gratitude tithe? On the human colony of Eridani Basilar struggled for a moment, his mandibles clicking erratically. He had no other basis. The lie was the single pillar supporting his entire legal structure. Without it, the whole thing collapsed into a pile of self-serving nonsense. The stability of the sector, our benevolent presence. He stammered the words hollow and meaningless. Your presence has been logged as an act of intimidation, Thorn stated, his voice like ice. Your benevolence has a recorded energy cost of 9,842 petajoules expended to terrorize a civilian population. The ledger is public. The numbers do not lie. A lie can build an empire, but it cannot withstand an audit. The quorum needed no further deliberation. The verdict was swift and absolute. The claim of the Varan ascendancy is dismissed, the moderator chimed. The gratitude tithe is declared an illegal instrument of coercion under Conclave Charter 7.42. The containment field around Eridani B is to be dissolved immediately. But it did not end there. The gas giant intelligence spoke again, its voice rumbling with ancient authority. Furthermore, a public audit of all existing Varan tithe agreements is hereby mandated. A full accounting is required. This was the true victory. Thorn had not just saved one colony. He had shattered the primary economic and political tool of the Varan ascendancy. He had forced a system-wide reckoning. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of client species would now have their chains examined in the full light of galactic law. The mirror he had held up to the Varan was now being shown to the entire galaxy. Xylar's hologram flickered and vanished without a word. The inquiry was over. On the bridge of the auditor, a slow cheer began to build. Yorick clapped Thorn on the shoulder, a wide grin on his face. That was a better kill than any torpedo, Elias. You gutted them with a history lesson. Anaya was watching the public conclave channels. Commander, the ledger is viral. Dozens of species are citing the Cathar precedent. They're filing their own petitions. You haven't just won a case. You've started a revolution. Thorn felt a profound sense of weary satisfaction. But he knew it was not over. The Varan were an ancient, proud power. They would not accept such a public humiliation gracefully. An empire does not surrender its most effective tool without a fight. He had won the legal battle. Now he had to prepare for the consequences. The true cost of victory is always paid after the judgment is rendered. A new alert flashed on Thorn's console. It was from Eridani B, a simple message from the colony's governor. We saw the whole thing. The sky is clear. Thank you. Attached was a single image, a red field under a blue sky where hundreds of kites made of nutrient film were being flown by joyful children. Lex Thorn said, his voice quiet. What is the Varan fleet doing? Their ship is holding its position, Commander, the AI replied. But it is powering up its main drive. Not weapons. The energy signature is consistent with a hyperlane breach and fold maneuver. A retreat. No, Thorn said, a cold certainty dawning on him. It's not a retreat. He looked at the energy readings himself. The power being drawn was immense, far more than needed for a simple jump. It was a brute force calculation, messy and inefficient. It was the act of an angry, impulsive entity. It was an escalation. Yorick battle stations, Thorn commanded, his voice sharp. They lost in the courtroom. Now they're going to try to win in the real world. The Varan ship did not jump. Instead, the energy it had gathered was channeled into a massive gravitic shear. The fabric of space-time itself began to warp around the human colony's star, Eridani. The star's light began to dim, its corona twisting into an unnatural spiral. "What are they doing?" Anaya gasped. "They are demonstrating the passive protection they offered." Lex stated, its voice devoid of emotion, but its data stream a torrent of alarm. "They are inducing a coronal mass ejection, a solar flare, one large enough to scour the surface of Eridani B." The Varen were not retreating. They were issuing a correction, a punishment. They were going to burn the colony from its world, not with weapons that could be traced back to them, but with the very star that gave it life, and they would record it as a tragic, natural, stellar anomaly. An anomaly that they in their wisdom had foreseen and had offered to protect the ungrateful humans from. It was monstrous. It was legally pristine. A final, perfect act of mirror justice. The rage Thorn had held in check for so long finally broke its leash. This was the Varen method in its purest form. If you cannot own them, erase them and write a history where you were their would-be saviors. It was a crime that created its own innocence. The ultimate power is not to win the argument, but to delete the debater. They are creating a receipt for their benevolence. Thorn snarled, his hands flying over the command console. He had to think. He couldn't block the flare. He couldn't outrun it. He had to use their own logic, their own system against them one last time. He had counted the cost of their intimidation. Now he had to make them pay it, Lex. The public ledger we created. Is it still mirrored? Is it still active? Affirmative, Commander. The Quorum is still monitoring the channel, logging the aftermath of their ruling. Good. A desperate, brilliant plan bloomed in Thorn's mind. It was a maneuver of pure accounting, a weapon made of numbers. Patch the Auditor's primary energy core into the ledger. Reroute all non-essential power. I want every joule we have available. Jorek stared at him. Elias, what are you doing? I'm not fighting the flare, Thorn said, his eyes burning with a cold fire. I'm fighting the invoice. He looked at the tactical display. The solar flare was building a wave of incandescent plasma about to burst forth from the star. The Varen ship held its position, a silent, gloating observer. They were the arsonists ready to film themselves calling the fire department. Lex Thorn commanded, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. We are going to pay their tithe. He was going to use the Auditor's entire energy reserve not to create a shield, but to create a transaction. A massive, undeniable system-scale transfer of energy. It would be logged, witnessed, and recorded on the same public ledger that had just condemned them. He would give them exactly what they wanted, a payment. A payment so large, so public, and so precisely timed that it would expose their crime beyond any shadow of a doubt. He would mirror their act of destruction with an act of accounting. A debt paid in full is the ultimate conviction. Anaya's console screamed with proximity alerts and radiation warnings. Commander, the ejection is imminent. Impact with Eridani B's magnetosphere in 90 seconds. It's a planet killer. The energy levels are off the scale. Jorek slammed his fist into the tactical rail. It's a firing squad, and they're making the sun pull the trigger. He turned to Thorn, his face a mask of disbelief. What do you mean, pay their tithe? We don't have anything to give them, and even if we did, why would we? Because they have built their entire legal defense on the premise that they are owed gratitude. Thorn said, his voice a low, intense hum of controlled fury. We are going to give it to them. We are going to drown them in it. He pointed to the main screen where the Varen ship sat impassive and malevolent. They expect us to raise shields. They expect us to run. They expect us to die, and then they will mourn our passing with a beautifully worded legal document. A system built on lies cannot process an act of radical weaponized truth. He turned to the fleet mine's glowing core. Lex, can you create a secure, instantaneous energy bridge between our primary reactor and their ship's energy intake manifold? Theoretically, Commander, the AI replied. It would be a directed high-loss transmission, extremely inefficient. We would be projecting raw power across open space. Over 80% of the energy would be wasted to dispersal. It's not about efficiency. It's about the receipt, Thorne countered. I don't care if only 1% gets through as long as the entire transfer is logged on that public ledger. Can you do it? Yes, Commander. But it will drain our core in under a minute. We will be left with only emergency life support. We will be a dead ship. The AI's calm voice delivered the dire warning with the same inflection it would use to report the time. The price of this maneuver was their own survival. On Eridani B, the sky was turning a sickly, beautiful orange. Anya Sharma pulled her son close, shielding his eyes from the celestial horror unfolding above them. The red dust at her feet seemed to vibrate. The very air tasted of metal and fear. She didn't understand the science, but she understood the intent. It was the feeling of a boot hanging over an anthill. They were being erased. Do it, Lex Thorne commanded. Jorek, secure all non-essential systems. Brace the crew for total power failure. He strode to the command chair, strapping himself in. This was it. The final move in a game they had been forced to play. He would not let the Varen write the last page of this history. The ledger remembers what empires try to forget. Anaya looked up from her console, her eyes wide with a sudden dawning comprehension. Oh, you beautiful madman, she breathed. It's a poison pill. A Trojan horse made of pure math. She began typing furiously, reinforcing the public ledger's broadcast protocols. I'm creating a subledger. Title, Tithe Payment Eridani B. Every watt we send will be itemized and time-stamped to the nanosecond. 60 seconds to impact, Jorek announced, his voice tight. The lights on the bridge flickered as power was shunted to the main reactor. A deep, groaning tremor ran through the ship's deck plates. The Auditor was gathering all of its life, all of its strength for one final desperate shout into the void. Varen ship is hailing us, the communications officer reported. On screen, Thorne ordered. Xylar's smug, chitinous face appeared. He was no longer in the formal inquiry chamber, but on his own ship's bridge. Behind him, his crew watched their handiwork unfold. Commander Thorne. The ambassador began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. A terrible stellar event. We are heartbroken. If only you had accepted our protection, we could have Ambassador Thorne cut him off, his voice like chipped granite. Your invoice has been received. Payment is being remitted. Xylar's mandibles paused their clicking. He did not understand. Payment. What are you? Energy bridge established, Lex announced. Transferring all available power. Now. The Auditor screamed. It was a silent, agonizing protest of stressed metal and overloaded conduits. A brilliant, blindingly white lance of pure energy erupted from the human ship's forward emitter, leaping across the dark space and slamming into the Varen vessel. It was not a weapon. It was a gift. A terrible, undeniable gift. On the public ledger visible to the quorum and half the galaxy, a new entry blinked into existence. Transaction initiated gratitude. Tithe Eridani B. Payer Fleet Vessel Auditor Humanity. Recipient Ascendancy. Flagship Cathar's Grace Veran. Amount 100,000 petajoules. Status pending acceptance. On the bridge of the Cathar's Grace, alarms blared. Unscheduled energy intake. A Veran technician shrieked, "It's flooding our core. Should we repel it?" Silar stared at the tactical display, then at the public ledger entry that had just appeared on his own screen. He finally truly understood. His composure shattered. It was a trap of perfect, inescapable logic. If they repelled the energy, they were refusing the tithe, admitting their offer of protection was a lie. If they accepted the energy, they were accepting payment for a service. They were at that very moment failing to provide. They would be exposed as frauds, their benevolence a cloak for the murder they were about to commit. A debt once paid makes the creditor responsible. Do not repel it. Xylar screeched, his voice cracking. Absorb it, and shut down that cursed ledger. We can't, the technician cried. It's a public broadcast mirrored on the Conclave's primary network. And the energy, it's configured as a tribute offering under their own legal protocols. To reject it is an act of war. Thorn watched Xylar's panic with cold satisfaction. He had them. He had caught them in the gears of their own infernal machine. The Veran who lived by the fine print were about to be killed by a footnote. The universe demands that all accounts be balanced. The solar flare erupted. A colossal wave of plasma, a billion hydrogen bombs detonating as one tore away from the star and raced towards the helpless planet. Impact in 10 seconds, Jorek said, his voice strangely calm. The lights on the Auditor's bridge died, plunging them into the red glow of emergency lighting. The ship gave a final shuddering groan and fell silent. The energy transfer was complete. They were adrift, powerless. But the ledger had one final update. Status accepted. The Veran had taken the money. They had accepted the tithe. And now the entire galaxy was watching as the disaster they had been paid to prevent was about to happen. The crystalline moderator of the quorum spoke, its chiming voice now cold and sharp as diamond. Veran Ascendancy, you have accepted payment for the protection of the Eridani system. A catastrophic stellar event is in progress. The Conclave expects you to honor your contract. Xylar was trapped. His gambit had been turned inside out. His perfect, deniable crime was now a public, contractual failure. To save his civilization from utter disgrace, he had to stop the flare. But the gravitic shear that had created it could not be so easily undone. It was a blunt, brutal instrument. Reversing it would take time and would leave an energy signature that would be an undeniable confession of their guilt. He had one option. He had to block the flare. He had to use his own ship as a shield. He had to perform the very act of protection he had been pretending to offer. Bring us between the star and the planet. Xylar roared. All power to forward shields. The massive Veran ship, the Cathar's Grace, moved with agonizing slowness. It positioned itself in the path of the coronal mass ejection. It was a desperate, humiliating act of self-preservation played out on a galactic stage. They were not saving the colony out of honor or duty. They were saving it to avoid a conviction. Their benevolence was a hostage to their own lie. The plasma wave hit. The Veran ship buckled under the onslaught. Its shields glowed, then flared into an incandescent shell of pure energy. From the darkened bridge of the Auditor, Thorn and his crew watched the silent, terrible spectacle. The Protector was being forced to protect. The bully was being compelled to take the punch he had intended for his victim. Justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is about forcing a hand. The flare washed over them, its fury absorbed by the Veran vessel. Eridani B, though battered by radiation and magnetic shock, was spared the direct scouring impact. The kites on its red fields might fall, but its people would live. When the wave passed, the Veran ship was a wounded beast. Its obsidian hull was scarred and pitted. Plumes of escaping atmosphere vented from a dozen fresh wounds. They had saved the colony, but the cost was immense, and their crime was now plain for all to see. They had interfered with a star, and the evidence was now burned into their own hull. The quorum's judgment was not long in coming. This time there was no inquiry. There was only a verdict. Veran ascendancy. The moderator's voice chimed, echoing across every public channel. Your actions have been witnessed. Your methods are now known. By the authority of the conclave, your charter of expansion is hereby revoked. Your seat on the High Council is suspended. All standing tithe contracts with all client species are declared null and void pending a full investigation into coercive practices. A shockwave went through the galactic political structure. An empire had been brought to its knees not by a fleet of warships, but by a single well-timed accounting entry. The mirror had been held up, and it had not just reflected the Varan's face. It had shattered their throne. On the bridge of the Auditor, there was no cheering. There was only the dead quiet of a ship on life support, and the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a battle won at near-fatal cost. "We're alive," Jorik whispered, staring at the scarred planet on the view screen. "The colony is alive." "Yes," Thorn said, "but we are not." He looked at the power readings. Emergency life support would last for 3 days. After that, the Auditor would be a frozen tomb. They had traded their ship for a principle. It was a cost he had been willing to pay. A victory that costs nothing is not a victory. It is a transaction. Commander Lex's voice came faint and tinny through the backup speakers. "I have a confession to make. My calculations indicated a 3.7% chance of your strategy succeeding. I advised against it in my core programming. I was wrong. The variable I failed to properly weigh was the Veran's own hypocrisy. It was in the end their critical vulnerability." Thorn smiled, a faint, tired expression. "The human element, Lex. We're good at spotting a guilty conscience." A week later, the rescue fleet arrived. It was led by a ship from a species Thorn had never met, a race of silicon beings who had been one of the Varan's oldest clients. Their captain hailed the Auditor. Commander Thorn, the silicon creature, said, its voice like stones grinding together. "Our freedom is thanks to you. The Varan ascendancy is in chaos. Dozens of species emboldened by your actions and the Cathar recording are dissolving their tithe contracts. The ledger you created, it has become our declaration of independence." Thorn watched as repair drones and medical frigates surrounded his crippled vessel. He had paid a price. The Auditor, his ship, his home, would spend years in space dock being rebuilt. His crew was exhausted, traumatized, but alive. The cost was tangible, but the win was durable. He looked at the public conclave ledger one last time before signing off his command. The top entry was no longer his transaction. It was a new, permanent article of galactic law ratified by the full conclave in emergency session. It was the precedent locked in for all time. Precedent 7.4.3. The Thorn Doctrine. A claim of protection, if accepted via payment or tribute, creates an unbreakable legal obligation. Failure to provide said protection constitutes fraud. The creation of a threat in order to extract payment for its removal is hereby defined as system-scale extortion, a crime against the conclave itself. The Varan method had been given a name, and then it had been outlawed. The institutional consequence was absolute. Thorne leaned back in his chair, the adrenaline of the past weeks finally draining away, leaving a heavy, quiet sense of peace. He thought of the colonists on Eridani B of the kites and the red dust. He had saved them not with a phaser, but with a principle. The law was not just a weapon or a shield, it was a mirror. And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is being forced to look at your own reflection. He watched a conclave beacon on a nearby patrol ship cool down its mission of observation, here now complete. The light from its central array dimmed, going from a sharp, judicial blue to a soft, resting white. The case was closed. The universe is governed by laws, physics, gravity, and the conservation of energy. But civilization is governed by another set of laws. Laws of consent, of debt, of justice. And the first rule of this law is that you cannot write an invoice for a cage. You cannot charge a people for the air you allow them to breathe. And you cannot hide a crime behind a receipt, because a ledger in the end remembers everything. It counts every cost, and it ensures all debts are eventually paid in full. The universe does not bargain, it balances.